The galaxy was a bustling place. 4,000 species had learned to travel between the stars. They built empires. They waged wars. They traded and argued, conquered and made peace, only to break it again. The great galactic concord united them all. It was a grand assembly where every species had a voice, and the loudest voices usually got their way. Humanity had been part of this great family for 300 years, and in all that time, they had barely spoken. When the first human ship appeared at the edge of known space, the galaxy took notice. They always did when a new species appeared. Scientists rushed to study them, diplomats rushed to welcome them, and military minds rushed to assess them. What they discovered was interesting. Humans hailed from a world called Earth, a planet that the Galactic Biological Index classified as a death world, Category T. It was not a kind classification. Earth was a planet of extremes. Its surface shifted and cracked from tectonic violence. Its weather could fluctuate from scorching heat to freezing cold within hours. The radiation from its star was harsh and constant. Its oceans were full of creatures capable of swallowing a shuttle whole, and its lands were covered in predators with claws, teeth, and venom. Diseases evolved there faster than anywhere else in the known galaxy. Even the plants were dangerous. One xenobiologist, after reviewing the data, simply wrote in his report, "How does anything live on this world at all?" But humans were alive more than alive. They did not just survive on their nightmare planet, they conquered it. They tamed fire, split the atom, mapped their own genetic code, and built machines that could think. They climbed out of their gravity well, reached their moon, then neighboring planets, and then the stars beyond. They arrived in the galactic community with a quiet confidence that to some seemed charming and to others disturbing. Everyone expected great or terrible things from them. A species from a death world usually went one of two ways. They became conquerors, using their hardened bodies and aggressive instincts to build empires, or they burned themselves out, their violent nature turning inward until they destroyed themselves. The galaxy watched and waited to see which path humanity would choose. Humanity chose a third option. They did nothing. They claimed 12 star systems on the edge of the galaxy. It was a modest territory, far from the centers of power, bordering a region called the Dead Expanse, where old civilizations went to die. No one else wanted these systems. Hyperlane routes were complex, the planets needed intensive terraforming, and the area was, to put it mildly, undesirable. Other species shrugged and let the humans have them. Then, humanity settled in. They built their colonies, established their trade routes, and sent polite ambassadors to the Concord who smiled, nodded, voted on minor resolutions, and never made a fuss. They traded fairly, kept their agreements, and were, by all accounts, perfectly pleasant neighbors. And that was it. Decades passed, then a century, then 2, then 3. In all that time, humanity never expanded beyond their initial 12 systems. They never built a grand fleet, and they never entered into a military alliance. They threatened no one. They did not even raise their voices in the halls of the conquered. When border disputes arose near their territory, they simply adjusted their routes and avoided trouble. When larger empires pressured them to join defensive pacts, they politely declined. When arms dealers offered them the latest military technology, they smiled and said they were not interested. The galaxy gradually stopped paying attention to them. It was not sudden. It happened slowly, just as one stops noticing a quiet neighbor. Other, louder events demanded attention. The Kriamani collapsed into civil war. The Maravani Data Collective discovered a new form of faster-than-light communication. The Solarian Confederation engaged in a bitter border conflict with the Yorvan Republic. These were the big, dramatic events that filled news feeds and consumed the attention of the Concord. Humanity, meanwhile, simply sat in their 12 systems and did what they did. A comfortable consensus formed about them. Humans were an insignificant species. Interesting biology. Certainly their death world origin made them physically impressive. They were stronger and more durable than most species, with remarkable endurance and immune systems that could fight off almost anything. Their senses were sharp, their reflexes fast, their pain tolerance almost absurd. But what good was all of that if they lacked the will to use it? The word people used most often when speaking of humanity was disappointing. Here was a species forged in the fires of one of the harshest worlds in the galaxy, and they turned out to be nothing more than quiet traders and polite diplomats. The death world broke them, people said, drained them of their fighting spirit. made them so tired of struggle that they simply abandoned ambition. Some were less kind. They called humans cowards, weaklings hiding at the edge of the galaxy, too afraid to compete with real civilizations. Jokes were common in the halls of power. How many humans does it take to win a war? No one knows. They've never tried. Such humor was popular among the more aggressive species, those who measured value by conquered territory and fleet size. No one wondered why a death-world species might choose silence. No one asked what they had been doing behind their borders for 300 years. No one thought to question why a species that had survived Earth could fear anything. No one, that is, except for a few. Ambassador Rael Sauron of the Vethari Dominion was not among those few. He was, in fact, exactly the type of person who had already made up his mind and saw no reason to change it. The Vethari were a proud species, tall and strong, combining features of birds and reptiles. They had scales that shimmered like oil on water, wings that had evolved into powerful arms, and eyes like gold coins that could see in spectra invisible to other species. They were ancient. Their empire had existed for 6,000 years, and for most of that time, they had been doing what they did best: conquest. The Vethari Dominion controlled 900 star systems. Their fleet numbered 420,000 warships. They had crushed 19 species, turning them into vassal states, absorbing their worlds, their resources, and their labor into the ever-growing machine of the Dominion. They were, by any reasonable measure, one of the 3 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. And Ambassador Sauron was well aware of this. He had spent 2 years studying humanity for the Vethari Military Council, not because anyone was particularly worried about humans, but because those 12 human systems sat atop 3 hyperspace transitions that the Dominion wanted, and the rare minerals in their asteroid belts were worth a fortune. The Dominion had been eyeing human space for decades. Sauron's task was to assess the risk. His report was thorough, confident, and completely wrong. Humanity poses a negligible military threat, he wrote. Their fleet numbers fewer than 200 vessels, mostly patrol boats and light escorts. They possess no orbital fortifications beyond standard civilian defense platforms. Their ground forces are estimated at fewer than 500 active-duty personnel, organized in a purely defensive structure. They have no history of military aggression, no military alliances, and no apparent capacity for a protracted war. Their economy, while stable, is smaller in scale than any major Concord power. In summary, the acquisition of human territory will meet minimal resistance and can be accomplished within a standard campaign cycle. He personally presented this report to the Military Council, standing proudly in the great stone hall where the Vethari military leaders gathered. The room was immense, carved from the volcanic rock of the Vethari homeworld, lit by fires burning in ancient stone braziers. Around a long table sat warlords, each commanding thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. At the head of the table sat Supreme Warlord Corvstein. Corvstein was old, very old, even by Vethari standards. His scales had darkened to a deep bronze with age, and the scars of 100 battles covered his body like a map of the Cilia sector. One of his golden eyes was artificial. The original had been lost in a war most people had forgotten. He had led the Dominion's military forces for over 80 years. In that time, he had not lost a single campaign. He was brilliant, ruthless, and completely confident in his superiority. He listened to Sauron's report with the patience of a predator watching its prey. "How do they respond to diplomatic pressure?" Corvstein asked. His voice was deep and gravelly. "Like grinding stones historically, they concede," Sauron replied. "In every border dispute, every trade disagreement, they have chosen compromise or retreat rather than escalation. They fundamentally avoid conflict." Corvstein nodded slowly. He looked around the Pusent Pilol at his warlords. He saw what he expected: hunger, thirst. The Dominion had been at peace for too long, and the warlords were restless. "Then it is decided," Corvstein said. "We will send a declaration of supremacy. The humans will have 1 solar cycle to surrender and accept vassalage. If they refuse, we will take what we want." The warlords struck their fists against the table in approval. The sound echoed through the stone hall like war drums. 2 days later, the Declaration of Supremacy arrived at the Tesserpoint diplomatic station on a neutral world. It was a formal document, written in the ancient legal tradition of the Vethari. It stated, very politely and in great detail, that the Vethari Dominion claimed ownership of all 12 human star systems, all resources within them, and all infrastructure built upon them. The humans were given two choices: surrender everything and become the 20th vassal species of the Dominion, or refuse and face the full military might of the most powerful war machine in the galaxy. The document was received by Ambassador Eros Voss. She was 63 years old. She was not physically imposing. She was of average height and slim, with gray streaks in her dark hair, which she wore in a simple style. Her face was lined with age and experience, and her eyes were a calm brown color that gave little away. She wore simple clothing, nothing ornamental, nothing that spoke of power or wealth. To most aliens, she looked exactly as they expected, a human to look, unremarkable. But there was something about her that made some people feel uneasy. It was hard to define. It was in the way she listened with a silence deeper than patience. It was in the way she smiled, warm and sincere, yet as if implying she knew something the other did not. It was in the way she moved through the diplomatic world, never appearing rushed, worried, or afraid. Some of her colleagues from other species described it as the calm of a person who had already seen the end of history and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. She read the Declaration of Supremacy carefully. She read it twice. Then she placed it on her desk and looked at the Vethari courier who had delivered it, a young officer in ceremonial armor who was trying very hard to look intimidating. "Thank you," she said. "Please convey to Supreme Warlord Korvstein that humanity rejects his generous offer." The courier blinked. "You reject it?" "Yes. We have no interest in becoming a vassal state. We are quite content with our current position." "Ambassador, I am not sure you understand the consequences of a refusal." "I understand perfectly," she said. She smiled her unsettling smile. "And I would strongly advise the Supreme Warlord to reconsider his position. A war with humanity will not end the way he expects." The courier stared at her, then almost laughed. He had seen the intelligence reports. 200 ships. No allies, no real army to speak of. This little elderly woman was threatening the Vethari Dominion. "I will convey your response," he said, amusement clear in his voice. He turned and left. Eros Voss watched him go. When the door closed behind him, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a device that looked like an ordinary communication tablet, but it was not. She entered a code that only 7 people in all of human space knew and spoke 4 words into it. "Execute protocol whisper." Confirmed. The response came back in less than a second. A single line of text appeared on the screen. "Confirmed. Prometheus is active. All systems on standby." Eros Voss put the device away. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, 420,000 Vethari ships were waiting. And somewhere else, in the 12 quiet systems humanity called home, something was waking up. She thought about the Vethari courier and his barely concealed laughter. She thought about 300 years of jokes, slights, and casual contempt that humanity had endured with a smile. She thought about the words coward and weakling and all the other terms the galaxy used to describe her people. And then she thought about what would happen when the galaxy learned the truth. She felt no anger, no excitement, no triumph. She felt only a deep, heavy sadness, because she knew that once the truth came out, there was no going back. 300 years of carefully maintained peace, 300 years of being underestimated, 300 years of choosing silence over spectacle and patience over pride. All of it was about to end. The galaxy was about to see what a death world species looked like when it stopped being quiet. Far on the other side of human space, deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a facility that appeared on no galactic registry, was invisible to every satellite or scanner, and did not exist in any database or map, one red light shifted from dormant to active. It was a small light. It sat on a console in a room that had not been visited by a living soul in over 50 years. The room was part of a complex that stretched for miles under the planet's crust, buried beneath layers of rock, metal, and energy shields that could hide it from anything in the known galaxy. The complex had been built slowly and carefully over 3 centuries, expanding, refining, and upgrading in total secrecy. The red light meant the complex had awakened, and the complex was the heart of something enormous. The artificial intelligence designated as Prometheus opened its consciousness for the first time since its last scheduled diagnostic, which had been 17 years ago. This was not a simple AI. It was not even a complex AI by the standards the galaxy would recognize. It was something entirely different, something humanity had been developing for 3 centuries in the deep silence of their hidden labs. something that made the most advanced artificial minds in the Concord look like children counting on their fingers. Prometheus reached out through networks the galaxy did not know existed. It touched systems on every human world, every human station, every human ship. It analyzed 300 years of intelligence data. It assessed the current threat. It calculated probabilities, outcomes, and response options in the time it takes for a human heart to beat once. Then it spoke 2 words into the network, and every human military installation in the 12 star systems heard them simultaneously. Begin sequence. The silence was broken. In hidden shipyards carved into asteroids, lights flared to life. In underground bases buried beneath the surface of moons, machinery began to hum. In the dark spaces between planets, where there was supposed to be nothing but empty vacuum, things began to move. The silence was ending, and the galaxy was not ready for what would happen next. The Vethari Dominion had not mobilized a grand fleet in over 100 years. The last time had been during the conquest of the Yorvit people, a campaign that ended in 3 weeks and added 6 star systems to the Dominion. Before that, the conquest of the Shelley, which had taken 2 months. Before that, the breaking of the Trenet Collective, which went so quickly that some historians argued it didn't count as a war. Every grand fleet in Vethari history had been victorious. Every single one. It was a record that spanned thousands of years, and it was a record that Supreme Warlord Corvstein intended to keep spotless. 15,000 warships gathered at the Vethari deployment point, a massive orbital station called the Iron Fist that hung over one of the Dominion's fortress worlds near the edge of human space. It was the largest military gathering in the region in history. Ships of all sizes and classes filled the void for 1,000 kilometers in every direction. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities, battlecruisers bristling with weaponry, carriers housing hundreds of smaller assault craft in their bellies, support ships, troop transports, medical frigates, electronic warfare vessels. It was a machine built for one purpose: destruction. In the center of the formation sat the Claw of God, Corvstein's personal flagship. It was 6 kilometers long, a mountain of metal and fire, shaped like the curved talon of the great predatory birds of the Vethari homeworld. It carried enough weaponry to crack a planet's crust. Its shields could withstand a constant bombardment from an entire enemy fleet. It was the most powerful warship in the Dominion, and it was Corvstein's throne. The old warlord stood on the bridge and looked out at his fleet through a massive forward viewport. The stars behind the ship seemed to dim, as if even light were reluctant to approach such a gathering of violence. Corvstein felt the familiar warmth of anticipation. This was what he was made for, not politics, not diplomacy. This was the gathering of strength before the strike. His second-in-command, Fleet Marshal Sira, approached with a data tablet. Sira was 40 years younger than Corvstein. Slim and striking, with silver-blue scales that caught the light so she seemed made of liquid metal, she was brilliant, calculating, and absolutely loyal to Corvstein. "Fleet assembled, Supreme Warlord," she said. 15,000 ships, all in combat readiness. Transport ships are carrying 2 million ground troops. Supply lines are secured for a 6-month campaign. 6 months? Corvstein let out a sound equivalent to a laugh among the Vethari. "We won't need 6 days. Sira hesitated. It was a minuscule matter, a pause so short most people wouldn't have noticed. But Corvstein noticed everything. "Do you have concerns, Marshal?" "A question, Supreme Warlord, not a concern." Sira carefully chose her words. "Our intelligence on human military might is based primarily on external observations and diplomatic sources. We have never directly scanned a human warship. We have never engaged human forces. We have never even confirmed their exact number of vessels. Sauron's report was thorough, but it was based on limited data. I simply note that humans have been remarkably effective at controlling information leaving their borders." Corvstein looked at her with his one good eye and his one artificial one. "Do you think the humans are hiding something? I think a species from a Category 7 death world that has existed for 300 years in a galaxy of predators might be more capable than their diplomatic posture suggests." Corvstein pondered this, then dismissed it. The Maravani survive by hoarding information. The Shelley survive by hiding in nebulae. The Yorvits survive by paying tribute to whoever is stronger than them. Species find many ways to survive that do not include military might. Humans survive by being too small and too far away to be worth the trouble. That is all. He turned back to the viewport. "We advance in 12 hours. Notify the fleet." Sira saluted and left. She did not argue further. She had served Korvstein long enough to know when his mind was closed to alternatives. But as she returned to her post, she couldn't shake a feeling that sat in her chest like a cold weight. She had studied the human data herself, not just Sauron's summary, but the raw intelligence files. And she had found something that bothered her, not what was in the files, but what was not. In 300 years of contact with the galactic community, humanity had produced 0 military incidents, 0 border skirmishes, 0 instances where a human warship had fired on a vessel of another species, even by accident, 0 defectors, 0 captured crews, 0 leaks of information. In a galaxy where even the most secretive species eventually had a breach, a defector, a captured ship, or an intercepted message revealing their capabilities, humanity had yielded absolutely nothing. This was not the profile of a weak species. This was the profile of a species that was very, very good at keeping secrets. But Sira kept that thought to herself. The armada was assembled. The order had been given. The machine was in motion, and it would not be stopped by the anxiety of one marshal. Across the galaxy, news of the Vethari mobilization spread like wildfire. The communication networks of the Galactic Concord carried the story to every corner of known space. The Vethari Dominion had declared its intent to absorb human territories. 15,000 warships were in motion. The humans had refused to surrender. Reactions were varied, but the dominant tone was one of somber pity. "A tragedy, but a predictable one," said the Keltari ambassador at the Concord Assembly. "A small species that failed to secure alliances or build adequate defensive structures. The galaxy is not kind to the unprepared. We must pass a resolution expressing concern," suggested the representative of the Maravani, a insectoid creature with 16 eyes, each blinking independently. Something sympathetic, but non-binding. "No point," said the Kree delegate sharply. "Too late. It will be over before the resolution passes through committee." No one offered help. Not a single species, not a single government, not a single fleet. Humanity had spent 300 years being quiet and polite, and the result was that when the wolves came to their door, they stood alone. Or, rather, almost no one offered help. A few voices spoke up, and they were all ignored. The loudest of these voices was Dr. Lysis Kale. Lysis was a Maravani, one of those scientists, informaticians, and insectoids her species was famous for. She was old, even by Maravani standards. Her chitin had faded to a dusty gray. Her complex eyes were clouded at the edges. She limped from an injury sustained decades ago. She was, by all external appearances, a harmless academic. She had spent 40 years of her life studying one subject: humanity. It had started as a small research project. Young Lysis was tasked with cataloging the trade patterns of recently contacted species, but something about humans caught her attention and wouldn't let go. It was the inconsistencies, the gaps, the places where data should have been, but wasn't. For 4 decades, she had compiled the most complete external analysis of human civilization that existed outside human space. And the more she learned, the more she feared. She requested an emergency meeting with the Concord's Intelligence Oversight Committee. She was granted 15 minutes, which was 5 more than she expected. She stood before a group of high-ranking intelligence officials from 6 species and laid out her findings with the persistence of a person trying to warn a city about an incoming flood. "The standard assessment of human military capabilities is based on a fundamental error," she began. "We have assumed that because we cannot see their military might, it does not exist. That is like assuming the ocean is shallow because you cannot see the bottom." She displayed her data 40 years of observations, correlations, and analyses. First, the human fleet. "We estimated at 200 vessels based on what we have observed entering and exiting human space through standard hyperlane routes. But human space is surrounded by zones of radar silence that they call natural interference due to unusual hyperspace topology. I asked 3 independent astrophysical teams to analyze these zones. The topology does not explain the interference. The zones are artificial. Humans are actively blocking our ability to see inside their borders." The committee shifted in their seats. The expressions of the officials became slightly less bored. Second, their economy. Human GDP, as reported to the Concord, is modest, but their resource consumption tells a different story. They import raw materials in volumes 3 to 4 times greater than what their visible infrastructure would require. Where does it go? Their civilian sector cannot explain it. Something inside their borders is consuming vast amounts of metal, rare elements, and energy, and we do not see what it is. She displayed another screen. Third, their spending on research and development, as a percentage of their economy, is 8 times the galactic average. 8 times. The Vethari invest heavily in military R&D, and even they do not approach this ratio. Humans are building something. They have been building something for 300 years, and they have told no one what it is. She paused. She looked at the faces around her and saw what she always saw: skepticism, amusement, dismissiveness. Fourth, and most importantly, the absence of information. In 300 years of galactic contact, not a single human warship has been captured or scanned by a foreign power. Not a single human service member has ever defected. No intelligence agency in the Concord has ever successfully placed an agent in human military structures. No intelligence signal has ever intercepted human military communication, and this is not normal. Even the most secretive species in the Concord occasionally have leaks. Humanity has had zero in 300 years. She leaned forward. The Vethari Dominion is about to attack a species we know almost nothing about. We have assumed their silence means they have nothing to say. I believe their silence means they do not need to say anything. The Vethari are walking into a darkness they have not measured, and I am terrified of what they will find. The chairman of the committee, a large amphibian with an eternally indifferent expression, looked at her for a long time. Dr. Kale, your research is noted. However, the Concord does not intervene in bilateral disputes between member states. The Vethari's actions, while aggressive, are within established precedents, and unless you have concrete proof of a specific threat rather than an absence of proof, we cannot justify any action. Lysis stared at him. An absence of proof is proof. That is the whole point. The 15 minutes are up. Doctor, thank you for your time. Lysis left the hall with the slow, heavy steps of a person who had done everything she could and knew it wasn't enough. Her assistant, a young Maravani named Oridi, waited for her in the corridor. Did they listen? Oridi asked, though the answer was obvious. They never listen, Lysis said. Not until it is too late. Meanwhile, inside human space, something remarkable was happening. In all 12 star systems, on all colonized worlds and orbital stations, the civilian population was moving, not running, not panicking, but moving. And on the colony world of New Geneva in the Corvin system, which was the farthest human settlement and would be the first target of the Vethari, there was a difference. The evacuation was a masterpiece of organization. Families walked in orderly rows toward underground shelters built into the Earth's crust. Schools released children on schedule, each group with assigned adult chaperones leading them to designated safe zones. Hospitals moved patients to hardened underground medical facilities that, until this day, had been sealed and listed in public records as geological survey stations. There was no confusion, no arguments, no traffic jams of people trying to escape. Everyone seemed to know exactly where to go and what to do. They carried pre-packed emergency bags that looked as if they had been sitting in closets, ready and waiting. Children did not cry, parents did not shout. People moved with the calm efficiency of a drill because it was won. Every human child from the age of 5 had participated in what schools called safety exercises. They were presented as routine, like fire drills on old Earth. Go here, bring this, follow these steps. The children did not know that these exercises were based on detailed military contingency plans. They did not know that the shelters they practiced entering could withstand an orbital bombardment. They did not know that the geological survey stations were actually underground cities, capable of supporting entire populations for years. Their parents knew, and their parents had patiently and quietly waited for 300 years. When the last of the civilians disappeared underground and the cities on the surface were empty, a different movement began. On military bases that officially did not exist, in hangars that appeared on no maps, personnel that the galactic community did not know about reported to stations they had trained their entire lives to fill. Uniforms were donned that had never been seen by alien eyes. Weapons were checked and charged that had never been fired in anger. Ships began to power up whose existence the galaxy did not know of, and the deep hum of their engines could be felt in the bones of everyone present. Humanity was preparing, and it was the quietest, most organized preparation for war the galaxy had never seen. 2 hours before the Vethari Armada crossed the border of the first human system, Ambassador Eros Voss sat alone in her office on Tesser Point. The station was now almost empty. The human staff had been evacuated over the last week, quietly and without fuss. Eros was the last one left. She had one final task. She opened a communication channel not to the Vethari, not to the Concord, but to the galaxy. She broadcast on all open frequencies, all news channels, all diplomatic links. She wanted everyone to hear this. Her face appeared on screens across the known cosmos. A calm, elderly woman sitting behind a simple desk, with an empty wall behind her and the logo of the United Earth government. She did not look frightened. She did not look angry. She looked sad. "This is Ambassador Eros Voss speaking on behalf of the United Earth and its people," she said. "This is humanity's final diplomatic message before the commencement of hostilities with the Vethari Dominion." She paused. The galaxy watched. "We want the record to state the following. Humanity did not seek this war. For 300 years of membership in the Galactic Concord, we have claimed no territory beyond our original 12 systems. We have attacked no one, threatened no one. We have honored every treaty, every trade agreement, and every diplomatic obligation we have entered into. We have been peaceful neighbors and honest partners." She looked directly into the camera, and for a moment, something hard to define appeared in her eyes. It was not anger, it was not fear. It was something deeper, something old and heavy, like the gaze of a parent watching a child reach for a flame. "The Vethari Dominion has chosen to declare war on us. They have demanded our surrender. They have gathered a fleet to take our worlds by force. We have refused their demands. We clearly and directly advised them that this course of action would not end as they expect. They ignored our advice." She folded her hands on the desk. "So, let the record show. We did not seek war. We have harmed no one. They chose this. And I want everyone who is listening to remember one thing. They chose this." The broadcast ended. The screen went dark. On the bridge of the Claw of God, Korvstein watched the broadcast with cold amusement. He turned to Sira. "The human woman speaks as if she believes she is in a position of strength. It is almost adorable." Sira did not respond. "All ships, advance," Korvstein ordered. "Enter their space." The Great Armada moved. 15,000 warships crossed the invisible line marking the edge of human territory, and in doing so, they crossed another line, one they could not see and did not know about. It was a line that humanity had drawn 3 centuries ago, and every day since had prayed that no one would ever cross it. When the fleet entered the first human system, something happened. Every sensor on every ship in the Armada gave a simultaneous glitch. Screens flickered, data streams distorted, navigation systems blinked. It lasted for exactly 3 seconds. And then everything returned to normal. A tiny hiccup, a minor anomaly. Sensor operators reported it up the chain of command. "Electronic warfare probes," they said. "Standard issue. The humans are testing their defenses, nothing to worry about." Korvstein dismissed it. He did not know that in those 3 seconds, an intelligence far superior to anything the galaxy had ever created had reached into his fleet like a hand reaching into a box of toys. Prometheus did not just scan the Vethari ships. It corticated them. Every vessel, from the smallest fighter to the Claw of God. Shield frequencies, reactor output, weapon systems, ammunition stores, hull composition, structural weaknesses, communication encryption keys, crew counts, crew positions, and the individual neural signatures of every fleet commander. In 0.3 seconds, Prometheus knew the Vethari Armada better than the Vethari knew themselves. And now it was calculating, running simulations, testing strategies, evaluating 1,000,000 possible battles, and choosing the optimal approach for each of them. It shared its findings with the human commanders waiting in dark, hidden places across all 12 systems. And those commanders looked at the data, nodded, and began positioning their forces. The trap was set, and the Vethari were walking into it with the confidence of a predator that had never met anything more dangerous than itself. They were about to learn what it meant to be wrong. The Corvin system was nothing special. A medium-sized yellow star, 6 planets, 2 of which were rocky, the rest gas giants. The second planet, New Geneva, was the farthest human settlement. It had been terraformed over 2 centuries into a green and pleasant world with rolling plains, clean rivers, and modest cities. About 12 million people had lived there a week ago. Now the surface was dark and quiet. With the cities standing empty, the lights were extinguished. From orbit, the planet looked abandoned. Warlord Korvstein entered the system with the casual confidence of a man entering his own home. 3,000 warships dispersed through the system in a standard formation for conquest. Sensors scanned. Weapons were charged, ready for anything. What they discovered was almost nothing. 37 ships. That was it. 37 small black vessels that had taken position in a loose formation near the system's star. They were elegant objects, built along lines that Vethari analysts did not recognize, with smooth hulls that barely reflected light. They had no visible weapon ports, no sensor arrays, no propulsion cells. They looked more like shadows that had taken shape than warships. On the bridge of the Claw of God, it became quiet when the count of 37 was confirmed. Sierra read the sensor data. She maintained a neutral tone, but Korvstein heard the confusion underneath it. 37, Korvstein repeated. He stared at the tactical display. 37 ships against 3,000. This isn't even a battle, it's a formality. Perhaps the rest of their fleet is deeper in their territory, Sierra suggested. They may be concentrating their forces around their main worlds. Then they are fools, Korvstein said. You do not surrender your outer systems without a fight. It encourages the enemy to build momentum. He dismissed the 37 ships with a glance. Send a signal to the human ships. Tell them to power down their engines and surrender. Will they be treated as prisoners of war under the POW Convention? The signal was sent. The 37 ships did not respond. They did not move. They did not shut down. They simply sat there, dark and quiet, like stones at the bottom of a river. Korvstein waited. He was a patient predator, but his patience had limits. No response, Supreme Warlord, reported the communications officer. Repeat the signal. Still no response. Korvstein's golden eyes narrowed. He did not like being ignored. Being ignored was, in Vethari culture, one of the highest forms of disrespect. These 37 insignificant ships did not even acknowledge his presence. It was an insult, intentional or not, and Korvstein did not tolerate insults. Send the vanguard, he said. 500 ships. Destroy them. The order swept through the fleet, and 500 Vethari ships broke formation and accelerated toward the 37 human vessels. They were cruisers and destroyers, fast and heavily armed, each manned by hundreds of trained Vethari warriors. They moved with the precision of a species that had been conquering worlds for 6,000 years. They quickly closed the distance. At optimal firing range, the Vethari commander gave the order to fire. 500 ships opened fire simultaneously. Plasma spears, kinetic batteries, guided torpedoes. The void between the fleets lit up with enough firepower to crack a moon. Every shot missed. Not missed in the way they sometimes missed in battle, when a target dodges or a weapon malfunctions. Missed in a way that should not have been possible. The 37 human ships moved. They moved in a way nothing of that size should move. They were in one place, and then they were simply in another. And the space where they had been was full of Vethari weapons, fire hitting nothing. The acceleration readings on the Vethari sensors made no sense. The numbers were wrong. They had to be wrong, because if they were correct, the forces involved would have turned any crew inside those ships into thin paste on the back wall. But the ships kept moving, kept dodging, kept being anywhere except where the weapons were. Then, the human ships opened fire in return. There were no warning shots, no dramatic broadsides, no slow escalation. One moment, the 37 ships were dancing through Vethari fire like leaves in the wind, and the next moment, they attacked. The weapons they used resembled nothing in the Galactic catalog. Kinetic projectiles, yes, but accelerated to speeds that the Vethari considered theoretically impossible for ship-based weaponry. The projectiles hit with a significant fraction of the speed of light, and when they struck Vethari shields, they did not splash against them or disperse their energy over the shield's surface like normal kinetic projectiles. They passed through them cleanly through, as if the shields were not there at all. Directed energy weapons followed, beams of focused destruction that struck with surgical precision. Each one was tuned to a frequency that perfectly matched the harmonic resonance of the Vethari shield technology. It was as if someone had been given the exact specs of every shield generator in the Vethari fleet and built weapons specifically designed to ignore them, which, of course, was exactly what happened. Prometheus had cracked their shield frequencies in those 0.3 seconds. And now, every human weapon in the system was calibrated to slide through Vethari defenses like a key into a lock. 500 Vethari warships began to die. It was fast. It was not dramatic. There were no great explosions, no lingering death throes, no ships limping away leaving trails of fire. Human weapons struck, and the Vethari ships ceased to exist. One moment they were there proud and mighty, full of living beings, and the next moment they were expanding clouds of superheated gas and falling debris. The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted only 4 minutes. When it ended, the 37 human ships returned to their original positions and went dark again, quiet, silent, waiting. 500 Vethari warships had vanished. Every single one. And the humans hadn't lost a single ship. They hadn't even been scratched. On the bridge of the Claw of God, silence reigned. Not the comfortable silence of confidence, but the ringing silence that follows a slap. Officers stared at their screens. Data analysts ran and reran their calculations, hoping to find an error. Weapons specialists combed through the combat footage frame by frame, trying to understand what they had just seen. Korvstein stood very still. His face was unreadable. His hands, resting on the railings of his command platform, gripped the metal so hard his claws left marks. Sira approached him cautiously. "Supreme Warlord, 500 ships destroyed, 0 enemy losses. Their weapons breached our shields without resistance. Their maneuverability exceeds everything in our tactical database. Vanguard engagement. Total loss." Korvstein did not speak for a long time. Then he spoke, and his voice was flat. "A trick. Electronic warfare. They confused our sensors, threw off our targeting. They got lucky, and they exploited a momentary advantage. It will not work a second time." He straightened. "Send 3,000 ships. Full combat formation. Overwhelming force. I want those 37 ships turned into dust." Sira hesitated. "Supreme Warlord, perhaps we should—" 3,000 ships. Marshal, 3,000 Vethari ships rushed forward. This time they moved in a tight combat ring, overlapping their shields, coordinating their firing patterns, leaving no gaps for the human ships. It was a formation designed exactly for this kind of engagement, where a small enemy force tried to use speed and trickery against a larger fleet. The Vethari had used it 100 times before. It always worked. The 37 human ships did the unexpected. They turned and ran. They slipped away from the advancing Vethari fleet, heading toward the largest gas giant in the system, a massive planet with swirling orange-brown clouds that the humans called Jotunheim. Korvstein watched the retreat with grim satisfaction. They run, as expected. Pursue them. Do not let them enter hyperspace. 3,000 Vethari ships gave chase. They were fast, but the human ships were faster. They kept a distance that was far enough to remain out of reach of Vethari weapons, but close enough to keep the Vethari on edge. It was like a game, and Korvstein knew it. The humans were trying to lure them, stretch the formation, create an opening. He would not yield. He kept his formation tight and followed at a steady speed. The human ships couldn't run forever. Eventually, they would have to stand and fight or leave the system entirely. Either way, Korvstein would have his victory. The chase led them to Jotunheim. The gas giant filled the viewport, massive and ancient, its atmosphere a roiling sea of storms and clouds. The 37 human ships dove toward the planet, then curved around it, using its gravity to accelerate in a trajectory of a gravity-assist maneuver that brought them back toward the Vethari fleet with incredible speed. It was a standard combat maneuver, bold, but nothing revolutionary. Korvstein adjusted his formation to meet the incoming ships and prepared to fire. He never got the chance. The clouds of Jotunheim exploded. From the upper layers of the gas giant's atmosphere, hidden beneath the planet's massive magnetosphere where no sensor could reach, a fleet rose. Ships came out of the clouds like large sea creatures surfacing from deep water. They came in waves, one after another, and they kept coming. Dreadnoughts, carriers, heavy cruisers, battleships, classes of ships that were not in the Galactic catalog, built to a design no one had ever seen, bristling with weapons no one could identify. They were black, like the first 37. Their hulls absorbed light. They did not reflect it. They rose from the clouds of Jotunheim in a massive formation that unfolded like the petals of some terrible flower, and their sheer number made the Vethari sensors stutter and recalculate. 600 ships. 600 warships that had been sitting in the upper atmosphere of the gas giant, completely invisible, waiting for the Vethari to occupy the right position, waiting for the 37 ships to lead them there like a matador leading a bull. The trap snapped shut. 3,000 Vethari ships were caught between 37 ships that had turned to face them, and 600 new warships approaching from above and below. It was a death box, a three-dimensional cage of firepower with no easy exit. The battle that followed was longer than the first engagement, but only because there were more ships to destroy. The human fleet fought with a coordination that exceeded anything the Vethari had ever seen. Each ship seemed to know exactly what every other ship was doing. There were no collisions, no friendly fire, no wasted movements. When one ship fired, another ship was already moving to exploit the gap it created. When a Vethari ship tried to focus fire on one human target, 3 other human ships converged on the attacker from different angles. It was less like watching a fleet action and more like watching a single organism with 637 bodies because, in a sense, that was exactly what it was. Prometheus was coordinating every ship in the human fleet simultaneously, processing the battle in real time, adjusting tactics second by second, exploiting every weakness as soon as it appeared. The human crews operated their individual ships, but Prometheus operated the battle, and Prometheus did not make mistakes. The Vethari fought bravely. Of that, there was never any doubt. They were warriors born into a warrior culture, and they did not surrender or run easily. Ship captains caught in a disadvantageous position chose to ram their vessels into the human formation rather than retreat. Squadron commanders rallied their forces again and again, trying to break through the encirclement. Individual crews fought on their ships until the hulls were burning around them. But bravery was not enough. Not against this. Not against an enemy that knew exactly where every Vethari shield was weakest, where every reactor was most vulnerable, where every ammunition store was one well-placed shot away from detonation. Not against an enemy that moved at the speed of thought and struck with the precision of a surgeon. 2 hours after the ambush at the gas giant, it was over. The Corvin system was littered with the debris of 3,500 Vethari ships. Clouds of wreckage and cooling metal stretched for millions of kilometers. Emergency beacons flickered among the debris, marking the locations of escape pods and life rafts where surviving Vethari crews waited for rescue. The human fleet had lost 0 ships. Not one. Not a single one. 637 human warships hung in the void among the ruins of the Vethari vanguard. Undamaged and untouched, dark, silent, and waiting. On the bridge of the Claw of God, which remained at the edge of the system with the main body of the fleet, Korvstein stared at the tactical display. The display was now mostly red markers for destroyed ships, red zones of debris, red warnings for communication failures and lost contacts. The bridge crew was silent. They were afraid. Korvstein could smell it on them, the sharp chemical scent that Vethari physiology produced in response to fear. He could not blame them. What they had just seen was not a battle. It was a demonstration. "Supreme Warlord," Sira said quietly. She was the only one who seemed able to speak. "Losses confirmed at 3,512 ships. Enemy losses confirmed at 0. Our vanguard is destroyed." Korvstein did not speak. "The human fleet is holding position. They are not advancing. They are not pursuing our survivors." She hesitated. They appear to be waiting. As if on cue, a transmission passed through. A human voice, calm and clear. A broadcast on an open channel. "Vethari Fleet. This is the United Earth Naval Force, Corvin System Defense Command. You have invaded sovereign human territory and engaged our forces. Your vanguard has been neutralized. We do not wish to continue this fight. You have seen what we are capable of. We ask you now, clearly and without ambiguity, to withdraw from our territory. If you leave peacefully, we will not pursue. We will release all captured personnel and recovered escape pods through neutral channels. This is your opportunity. Take it." The message ended. The bridge was silent. Korvstein looked at the display. He looked at the 600 enemy ships sitting calmly among the wreckage of his fleet. He looked at the numbers, the terrible, impossible numbers that told him he had lost 3,500 warships without inflicting a single casualty on the enemy. And then, something happened inside him, something that had not occurred in 80 years of command, in hundreds of battles won and lost, something that the supreme warlord of the Vethari Dominion, the most decorated military commander in his civilization's history, had never experienced. He felt doubt. It lasted for 3 seconds. Then the doubt was consumed by something older and stronger. Rage. Pure, burning, volcanic rage. The rage of a predator who had been humiliated. The rage of a conqueror who had tasted defeat for the first time. The rage of an old warrior who had just discovered that all his understanding of the enemy was wrong, and who would rather burn the galaxy to the ground than admit it. "No," he said. Sira looked at him. "We do not retreat," Korvstein said. His voice was low and dangerous. "We do not surrender. We do not accept mercy from a species we came to conquer. Transmit a signal home. Every ship, every reserve, every vessel capable of fighting. I want them here, all of them. Supreme Warlord, our losses are. This is a lesson. Now I know who they are, and I will bring enough force to break them, regardless of this. There are 270,000 ships remaining in the Dominion fleet. Call them all." Sira stared at him. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that what they had seen today suggested that 270,000 ships might not be enough. She wanted to ask him the question that burned in her mind. If this was what the humans had in one system, what was waiting for them in the other 11? But she was Vethari, and Vethari did not question their supreme warlord. She gave the order. Across the galaxy, Dr. Lysis Kale sat in her research office on the Maravani homeworld and watched the combat data leaking from the Vethari communication channels. Her complex eyes processed the information at the speed of her species, and with every new fragment of data, her fear deepened. Her assistant, Oridi, stood behind her, watching the same streams. 600 ships, Oridi whispered, hidden in the atmosphere of a gas giant. And how long had they been there? Long enough to be invisible when the Vethari scanned the system before their advance, Lysis replied. They were waiting. It was planned. Every moment of this battle was planned. The Vethari are calling for reinforcements. Their entire remaining fleet. Lysis closed her eyes. And it won't matter. How can you know that? Lysis turned to look at her young assistant. Her old eyes carried a weight that came from 40 years of studying a mystery the galaxy had dismissed as boring. Because those 600 ships came from one system, she said. One system out of 12. And the humans have been building in secret for 300 years. She turned back to her screens. The Vethari will bring everything they have, and it won't be enough. Nothing will be enough. The galaxy has made a terrible mistake, Oridi. We looked at the humans and saw what we wanted to see. A quiet species. A harmless species. A species not worth worrying about. She brought up a map of human space. 12 star systems, 12 little dots on the edge of the galaxy, a map that everyone looked at and saw weakness. We should have asked ourselves a question, she said. We should have asked why a death world species, a species born in violence and hardened by suffering, a species that survived everything their planet could throw at them and then climbed out of its gravity well on rockets made of controlled explosions. Why would such a species choose silence? We assumed they were broken. We assumed they were scared. She looked at the map, at those 12 little dots that suddenly seemed much larger than before. They were not scared. They were patient. And now, their patience has ended. Far across the void of space, human trade ships and diplomatic personnel on alien worlds were packing their offices. On Concord stations, neutral ports, and alien capitals across the galaxy, humans were quietly and silently closing their operations and heading home. No announcements, no explanations, just a steady, organized withdrawal of every human presence beyond their own borders. It was a final warning, a warning the galaxy didn't understand until it was too late. The humans were clearing the board, and the real war hadn't even begun. The Vethari Dominion took 11 days to assemble its full military might. 11 days of ships streaming from 900 star systems, from border garrisons, patrol routes, training stations, and reserve sites, converging on a deployment point at the edge of human space. It was a total mobilization of one of the galaxy's greatest military powers, and it was a spectacle of terrifying beauty. 270,000 new warships joined the 110,000 survivors from the disaster in the Corvin system, a total of 380,000 warships. The number was almost beyond comprehension. When the fleet took formation, it stretched across a volume of space larger than most solar systems. The cumulative firepower of the gathered ships could theoretically sterilize an entire planet in hours. It was the largest gathering of military force the galaxy had seen in over 1,000 years. Korvstein stood on the bridge of the Claw of God and surveyed his armada. He had not slept well in the 11 days since the events in the Corvin system. The memories of those 600 black ships rising from the clouds of the gas giant spun in his head on a loop, and every time he saw it, the rage in his chest burned brighter. He had been surprised. He had been defeated. He had been offered mercy, which was worse than both. He would not be surprised again. His strategy was simple and overwhelming. He would divide the 380,000 ships into 12 strike groups, one for each human star system. He would attack all 12 systems simultaneously, giving the humans no time to concentrate their forces. Even if each system contained 600 ships, as the Corvin system had, that was only 7,200 warships. None of his fleet exceeded them by more than 5 to 1. The mathematics of war was clear. Sira cautiously and respectfully noted that the 600 ships in Corvin might not represent the full human power in that system, that there might be more. Corvstein acknowledged the possibility and accordingly increased the size of each strike group. 12 strike groups varied from 20,000 ships for the smaller outer systems to 50,000 for the suspected human core worlds. "If they have more than we expect," Corvstein said, "then we will overwhelm them with numbers. If they have less, we will overwhelm them with speed. Either way, we will overwhelm them. That is the Vethari way." Sira nodded and said nothing more, but in the privacy of her quarters, she wrote a personal message to her family and sealed it for delivery in the event of her death. She had a premonition that she would not survive the next few days, not because she was a coward, but because she was smart enough to fear what the humans might be, and wise enough to know that Corvstein was not. On the 12th day, the great Vethari armada moved. 12 strike groups, 380,000 warships, splitting and diving into human space through 12 different hyperspace routes aimed at 12 different star systems. The required coordination was massive, a testament to a millennium of Vethari military experience. Each ship arrived at its target system within minutes of every other ship. The timing was almost perfect, and it meant nothing, because when the 12 Vethari strike groups dropped out of hyperspace in the 12 human star systems, Prometheus activated Protocol Fenris, and the galaxy changed forever. The zones of radar silence around human space had never been natural. They were a veil, a wall of artificial interference maintained by thousands of hidden satellites and relay stations that prevented anyone outside from seeing what was inside. For 300 years, the veil had hidden what humanity was building. Now, when the enemy was inside the walls, there was no longer any reason to hide. The veil dropped, and every sensor in the Vethari fleet saw the truth simultaneously. In the Corvin system, where Corvstein had sent a strike group of 30,000 ships, expecting to face the same 600 ships as before, tactical displays lit up with contacts. Not 600, not 1,000, not 2,000. The number kept rising as hidden ships activated their systems and made themselves visible. Ships came out of asteroid fields where they had been powered down and invisible. Ships rose from the surface of moons where they had been buried under camouflage netting and sensor-absorbing material. Ships detached from the dark sides of planets where they had hung in cold silence for months, years, or decades. In the Corvin system alone, there were over 20,000 human warships. And Corvin was not special. The same thing was happening in every system. The same terrifying discovery unfolded on the tactical displays of every Vethari commander. Human ships were everywhere. They had been everywhere the whole time, hidden in dark spaces, blind spots, places no one thought to look because no one believed anything was there. The total number of the human fleet, when Prometheus finished activating all hidden assets across all 12 systems, was over 180,000 specially built warships, not a few hundred as the galaxy believed, not a few thousand as the most generous estimates admitted. 180,000 warships, built in secret shipyards carved into asteroids, moons, and the hollowed cores of barren planets over 3 centuries. But the ships were only part of it. There were also defensive platforms, hundreds of thousands of them small, automated gun stations located throughout space like mines in a field. They were cheap, expendable, and equipped with the same shield-piercing weapons that had torn apart the Vethari vanguard. Individually, they posed a negligible threat. Collectively, they turned every cubic kilometer of human space into a shooting gallery. And then there was the weaponry itself. 3 centuries of research and development, funded at 8 times the galactic average and conducted in total secrecy, had resulted in technology that the rest of the galaxy would not develop for generations. The spatial drive was the most terrifying of them all. It was a miniature hyperspace jump system that allowed a ship to perform micro-jumps within the battlefield, vanishing from one position and appearing in another in the time it took to blink. A human ship could be in front of you, then it was behind you, then it was next to you, and you were dead before your targeting computer could figure out where to aim. In the 12 star systems, The 12 Vethari strike groups collided with the full power of humanity's 300-year preparation for a war they had hoped would never come. And in 12 star systems, the same terrible, one-sided battle occurred, with only minor variations. The largest clash took place in the Sol system around Earth itself, where Korvstein had sent his heaviest strike group of 50,000 ships. The Vethari dropped out of hyperspace, expecting a fight. They received an apocalypse. 40,000 human warships were waiting for them, positioned in a formation that covered every approach to the inner system. At their center sat the largest ship any Vethari had ever seen, a dreadnought that made Korvstein's Claw of God look like a patrol boat. It was the UES Silent Resolution, flagship of the United Earth Naval Force, 3 times larger than anything in the Vethari fleet. The Silent Resolution did not fire first. None of the human ships fired. They waited. They gave the Vethari 5 minutes to assess the situation, to see the numbers, to understand what they were facing. Then they broadcast a message, word for word, which was transmitted simultaneously in all 12 systems. Vethari forces, you are outnumbered and outgunned. Your fleet dispositions, shield frequencies, and weapon capabilities are known to us in detail. We can destroy you. We give you 1 chance to retreat. You have 5 minutes to begin your retreat to the system's hyperspace limit. If you retreat, you will not be pursued. If you do not retreat, we will engage with full force. There will be no more warnings. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. An eternity in combat. Long enough for every Vethari strike group commander to look at their tactical displays, see the thousands of contacts surrounding their fleet, and realize that the battle they had been looking for was not the battle they had found. In some systems, the Vethari strike group commanders were pragmatic enough to see the truth and order an immediate retreat. Their ships turned and rushed toward the hyperspace limit, and true to their promise, the human ships allowed them to leave. There was no battle in those systems. But in most systems, the Vethari were warriors, conquerors, proud to the point of madness and brave to the point of recklessness. They looked at the human fleet and attacked. The battles were short. The human ships fought with the same terrifying coordination that had destroyed the Vanguard in the Corvin system, but on a much larger scale. The 180,000 ships moved as a single organism, directed by Prometheus. Every ship played its role in a grand strategy that adapted in real time to every movement of the Vethari. The spatial drives made the human fleet nearly untouchable. The concentration of Vethari firepower, aimed at a group of human ships, struck empty space because those ships had jumped behind the Vethari formation and were already firing into their unprotected rear. Defensive platforms added another layer of destruction. They were everywhere, filling the space between large ships, creating zones of crossfire that turned any attempt at organized retreat into a gauntlet of fire. Vethari ships that broke formation to run were destroyed by platforms they could barely see on their sensors. And through it all, the human ships demonstrated the same cold professionalism they had shown in Corvin. There was no rage in their combat, no anger, no hatred, no bloodlust. They fought like a surgeon works, precise, economical, with total focus on the task at hand. They did not waste ammunition, they did not overkill targets, they did not fire on escape pods or disabled ships. Every shot had a goal, and every goal was won: to end the fight as quickly and efficiently as possible with the minimum necessary destruction. It was this more than the weapons, more than the numbers, more than the technology that truly terrified the surviving Vethari. Because brutality was something they could understand, rage was something they could respect. But this calm, methodical dismantling of their fleet spoke of something deeper in a species that viewed war not as glory, adventure, or even a necessity, but as a failure, a terrible and regrettable failure that needed to be resolved as soon as possible so that normal life could resume. The humans didn't like it, and that made everything worse. The 12 human system battles, as they would later be named, lasted 6 hours. By the time the last Vethari ship surrendered, fled, or was destroyed, the great armada that had entered human space with 380,000 units ceased to exist as a fighting force. Over 340,000 warships were lost. The military might of the Vethari Dominion, the pride of their civilization, the instrument of 6,000 years of conquest, had been broken. Humanity had lost 214 ships and approximately 6,000 people. In the bloodiest military campaign of the Galactic century, humanity's losses amounted to a rounding error. But the war was not over. Not yet. Because for the first time in 300 years, human warships crossed the boundaries of their territory. The fleet that made the jump numbered 5,000 units, selected from reserves that hadn't been needed for the defensive battles. It was led by the Silent Resolution, and it made a single hyperspace jump that brought it to a place the Vethari could never imagine the enemy could reach, their homeworld. Vethar Prime was an old world, a planet of red stone and thin atmosphere, lit by a dying orange sun. It had been the center of the Dominion for 6 millennia. Its cities were ancient and magnificent, built from the same volcanic stone from which the Vethari were born, rising in great towers and graceful arches that spoke of a civilization at the peak of its power. It was the most heavily defended planet in the Dominion, surrounded by orbital platforms and ground-based weapon systems and constantly patrolled by warships. Or it had been. The warships were now gone, sent to die in human space. The orbital platforms were there, but they were designed to fight pirate raids and minor incursions, not a fleet of 5,000 warships armed with technology centuries ahead of anything in the Dominion's arsenal. The human fleet arrived without warning. One moment, the skies over Vethar Prime were clear. The next moment, 5,000 ships filled the void above the planet like a dark cloud passing over the sun. The orbital platforms opened fire. The human fleet destroyed them in 11 minutes, clean, precise, targeted strikes that disabled their weapons and power systems without destroying the stations themselves. The crews on the platforms remained alive, floating in disabled stations, watching through their viewports as the human fleet took position in orbit of their world. Then, the fleet went silent. The firing stopped. The ships hung in the sky like silent monuments. Their dark apertures blocked out the stars, and they broadcast a message. It played on all frequencies. Every communication system on Vethar Prime picked it up. It sounded in military channels, civilian broadcasts, emergency networks, and personal devices. Every Vethari on the planet heard it, from the highest government officials in the capital to children in the smallest rural settlement. People of Vethar Prime, this is the United Earth Naval Force. Your fleet is gone. Your warriors are dead, captured, or retreating. We are over your world. We have the capability to destroy your civilization in a few hours. We will not do that. We are not conquerors. We are not destroyers. We are not who you tried to make us. The message continued. We offer you the following terms: immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities, withdrawal of all Vethari armed forces from all disputed territories, liberation of all 19 species currently held by the Dominion in vassalage, reparations to be paid to those vassal species, not to humanity, a formal public apology broadcast to the Galactic Concord. In return, your homeworld will not be touched. Your civilization will not be dismantled. Your people will not be harmed. Your culture will continue, and you will remain a sovereign nation within the Concord. A pause. You have 1 solar cycle to accept these terms. We will wait. And they waited. 5,000 warships hung over a world of billions. And they did nothing. They did not fire. They did not threaten. They did not even move. They just sat there. A silent demonstration of absolute power restrained by absolute containment. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Concord exploded. News of the 12 battles spread within hours, carried by FTL communication networks and amplified by the absolute impossibility of what had happened. An insignificant species of 200 ships had revealed itself as a military superpower with 180,000 warships and technology decades ahead of the galactic standard. The Vethari Dominion, once one of the 3 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, had been defeated in a single day. Human warships were now in orbit of the Vethari homeworld. Every government, every army, every intelligence agency in the Concord was performing the same calculations and coming to the same conclusion. Humanity was not just strong, humanity was perhaps the most powerful military force in the galaxy. They had been for years, maybe decades, maybe longer, and they had said nothing, done nothing, taken nothing. The Concord Assembly called an emergency meeting. The hall, an enormous circular chamber that could hold representatives of 4,000 species, was full for the first time in many years. Every seat was occupied. Every delegation was present. The noise was deafening. Thousands of alien voices shouted in hundreds of different languages. They were all asking the same questions. How did we not know? How did we miss this? What do we do now? Dr. Lysis Kale was given the floor not because anyone invited her, but because the Maravani delegation, finally understanding the value of her 40 years of research, demanded she be heard. She walked to the podium on her old, limping legs and looked at the 4,000 species of frightened faces and said, "I told you." Her voice was quiet, but the hall went silent to hear her. And the words carried, "I stood before your intelligence committee and told you that the absence of proof is proof, that their silence is not weakness, that we did not know what was lurking behind their borders." She activated a display showing the now confirmed number of the human fleet, 180,000 warships, hundreds of thousands of defensive platforms, technology that the Concorde's best scientists were still trying to understand. For 300 years, we had the most dangerous species in the galaxy as a neighbor, and we called them cowards. We laughed at them in our halls of power. We joked about their small fleet and their quiet diplomats. We patted them on the head and treated them like children. Her voice became harder. And when the Vethari came for them, none of us helped. Not one. 4,000 species in this Concorde, and not one offered the humans so much as a sympathetic voice. We abandoned them because we thought they were weak, because helping the weak is inconvenient, because weak species do not matter. She looked around the hall, and now we learned that they were not weak at all. They were the strongest of us all. They had the power to dominate this galaxy, and they chose not to. They had the power to take anything they wanted, and they only wanted to be left alone. Every peaceful day of the last 300 years was a choice. They chose kindness when they could have chosen conquest. She paused. The silence in the hall was absolute. "And you called them cowards." She left the podium without another word. The hall remained silent long after her departure. On Vethar Prime, Warlord Korvstein received the demand for surrender on his shattered flagship, which was limping home through hyperspace with failed engines and a hull breached in 7 places. He had survived the disaster in the Corvin system by retreating to the Claw of God when it became clear the battle was lost. He had watched the destruction of his fleet from the bridge of his dying ship. He had seen the numbers. He understood what they meant. Now he sat in his quarters aboard the Claw of God, which drifted in orbit above his homeworld, surrounded by 5,000 enemy ships. And he read the human surrender terms. He read them once, quickly. Then he read them again, slowly. Then he read them a third time, because he could not believe what he was reading. The terms were lenient, not just lenient, they were generous. Humanity demanded almost nothing for itself. No territory, no resources, no occupation, no regime change. They wanted the Vethari to cease hostilities, liberate their vassals, and apologize. That was essentially it. Korvstein had conquered 19 species. He knew what conquest terms looked like. He had written them himself. Territorial seizures, mining rights, military restrictions, government restructuring, occupation forces, puppet rulers, rituals of humiliation. These were the tools of a conqueror, and Korvstein had used all of them. The humans had used none of them. It made no sense. They had won. They had won completely and unconditionally. Their fleet was over his world, and his fleet was debris. They could have taken everything they wanted. Everything. And they asked for almost nothing. Sira entered his quarters. She too had survived the battles, though she looked as if she had aged 10 years in the last 12 days. Her silver-blue scales were dull, and her eyes were weighed down by exhaustion. "The military council has been dissolved," she said. "The civilian government is asking for your permission to accept the human terms." Korvstein sat in his chair and stared at the document on his screen. Terms that asked for almost nothing from a species that could have taken everything. "Why?" he said. The word escaped as a barely audible whisper. "Supreme Warlord? Why such terms? Why not take our worlds? Why not break our fleet? Why not scatter our people and make us the 20th vassal species in their collection?" He looked at Sira, and for the first time in her long service to him, she saw confusion in his golden eyes, not anger, not pride, but confusion. This is not how war works. This is not how victory works. You destroy your enemy, or you force him to serve you. These are the options. This is how it has always been. Perhaps not for them, Marshal. Korvstein stared at her. Then he looked at the ceremonial blade at his belt. It was ancient, made from the volcanic glass of Vethar Prime, sharper than metal and darker than night. It was the symbol of the Supreme Warlord's office, the symbol of Vethari defiance and strength. No Supreme Warlord in 6,000 years had ever surrendered it. He drew the blade from its scabbard. He held it in his hands for a long time, feeling its weight. The weight of 6,000 years of conquest, of pride, and of never yielding to an enemy. Then, He laid it on the table. "I yield," he said, accepting the terms. The news of the surrender spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. The Vethari Dominion, invincible for millennia, had unconditionally surrendered to the humans. The war was over. It had lasted 11 days. And then, Ambassador Eros Voss appeared before the Galactic Concord. She had received no advance notice. She had not requested a special session. She simply appeared in the assembly hall of the Concord, took her seat in the modest section of the human delegation on the upper tier, where minor species were placed, and asked for the floor. She was recognized instantly. Every eye, sensor, and appendage in the hall turned to her. She stood. She was still the same woman, still small, with gray hair, still in simple clothing, still with that warm, sad smile that had suddenly become much more understandable than ever before. "We never wanted you to see this," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the hall was silent to hear her, and the words carried, "We built our strength so we would never have to use it. We stayed quiet so we would never have to speak. We wanted nothing more than to live in our 12 systems, trade with our neighbors, and be left alone." She looked around the hall. 4,000 species, 4,000 civilizations. They were all looking at her with new eyes. "Now you know who we are, and I understand that things will never be the same. You will look at us differently. You will think of us differently. The quiet neighbors on the edge of the galaxy are gone, and in their place, you see something that frightens you." She paused. "We are sorry. We are sincerely sorry. Not for defending ourselves, we will never apologize for that, but for the fact that you had to see it. We are sorry that 3 centuries of peace, patience, and carefully chosen silence were destroyed in 11 days. We built a world where we could be kind, and now that world is gone." She sat down. The silence in the hall lasted a very long time, and it was a silence of a different kind than the galaxy had ever heard. It was the silence of 4,000 species who suddenly realized they had never understood the meaning of the word power. 6 months passed. The galaxy did not stop turning. Trade routes continued to run. Diplomatic channels remained open. The Galactic Concord held its meetings, passed its resolutions, and conducted its business. On the surface, the great machine of interstellar civilization continued to operate just as it always had. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Nothing was the same, and everyone knew it, even if most of them did not know how to talk about it. The war between the Vethari and the humans had lasted 11 days. 11 days from the first shot fired in the Corvin system to the moment Corvstein laid his blade on the deck of his shattered flagship. In those 11 days, the Vethari Dominion lost over 340,000 warships. Millions of Vethari soldiers and crew were killed, captured, or stranded in escape pods that humanity carefully gathered in response. The most powerful war machine in the galaxy, built and maintained over 6,000 years of continuous conquest, had been dismantled in less than 2 weeks. Humanity had lost 214 ships and approximately 6,000 people. The numbers were published in the official Concord Conflict Registry, and every species that read them felt the same thing. Not surprise, not admiration, but fear. A deep, primal fear that came from understanding for the first time how large the chasm was between human capabilities and the capabilities of everyone else. But then, to the fear was added something else, something more complicated. Because what did humanity do next? The surrender terms were fulfilled exactly as they were written. The Vethari withdrew from the 3 disputed border systems, not even their main territory, but the disputed zones that had been debated for decades. The 19 vassal species held under Vethari subjection were liberated, every single one. The species that for centuries had been crushed under the Vethari's boot suddenly found freedom. Their chains were broken not by their own strength, but by a species most of them had never even met. Reparations were paid not to humanity. Humanity asked for nothing. The reparations went to the liberated vassal species, calculated based on the economic damage from their subjection and distributed through the Concord's neutral mechanism. Humanity did not even oversee the distribution. They created the framework, funded the initial costs from their own treasury, and then stepped back. The Vethari apologized. It was a formal broadcast, made by the civilian government that had come to power after the dissolution of Corvstein's military council. It was stiff, uncomfortable, and clearly painful for a species that had never apologized for anything in 6,000 years. But it was real, and it was public, and the galaxy heard it. And then, the humans went home. That was what no one could understand, the surprise. The warships returned to their hidden locations in their 12 systems. The sensor veil went back up, though now it was more of a courtesy than a secret. Everyone knew it was there. Everyone knew what was behind it, and everyone knew that behind it was a species that could have ruled the galaxy and chose not to. When human diplomats spoke quietly in the halls of the Concord, all species listened not because they were afraid, though some of them were afraid, but because they had learned that when the quiet speak, they are worth hearing. When a human ship passed through foreign space, it was met not with condescension, but with a respectful nod. Captains of other vessels signaled a greeting, and the human ship returned the signal, and both continued on their way. And that interaction was small, but it meant something it hadn't meant before. When conflicts arose between other species, as they always had and always would, a new factor appeared in every calculation. Not what the humans would do, but what the humans would think. It was a subtle influence of the kind that could not be measured or quantified, but it was there. The knowledge that somewhere on the edge of the galaxy, one was watching quietly, patiently, and that this species possessed the power to change everything. But they had the wisdom not to. It was not a perfect galaxy. It never had been, and never would be. Species still fought. Empires still rose and fell. Injustice still existed. Humanity had not fixed everything because fixing everything was impossible, and attempting it would have been the very arrogance they had learned to avoid. But things became a little better, a little kinder, a little more thoughtful, and that was enough. That was what the 300 years of silence were for. Not to hide, not to wait, but to prove that the loudest statement a species could make was the choice to remain silent when it had every reason to scream. And somewhere beneath the surface of Earth, in a facility that appeared on no registry, Prometheus returned its single red light to sleep mode. After the crisis was managed, the calculations completed, and the threat neutralized with the minimum necessary force, humanity was safe and the galaxy was intact. And that was what mattered. The great intelligence drifted into sleep or something like sleep, and it waited, patiently, silently, ready, as it had always been, as it always would be. A guardian built by a species that better than any other understood what a guardian was, because they understood what happened when no one stood on guard. The stars turned, the galaxy breathed, and the quiet returned to silence, because they had long ago learned, in the blood and fire of their terrible, beautiful, impossible world, the oldest and truest lesson any species could learn. The loudest thing in the universe is silence when it comes from something that can shake the stars.